Good afternoon, Professor Rossi.
Good afternoon.
So happy to have you on the Senior Boulevard TV.
I'm happy too. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm very thrilled to have you and very honored with your past expertise to have your opinions on the topic we'll address moving forward. Before we diving into the subject today, could I ask you to give you a little bit an introduction on your past and your past activities to our audience to see, to better understand your past activities?
Yes, I began studying economics in the early 1990s at University in Fribourg, Switzerland. Then I did my PhD in economics there. I obtained it in 1991. And then I moved to London, to the University College London, where I did a second PhD 3 years later in economics before returning back to Switzerland, where I had the chance to get a professorship at both the University of Switzerland, of Italian-speaking Switzerland in Lugano, and at the University of Fribourg. And I was also invited to give lectures at the Center for Banking Studies in Lugano. And I did this for about 10 years. But then it was too much for me, traveling all weeks here and for. So I decided to remain in Fribourg, to expand my activity in Fribourg. Since 2009, I have a full professorship there, and I'm most of the time involved in investigating economic policy issues as regards macroeconomic policy and especially monetary policy. And since the global financial crisis burst in 2008, I was also involved in addressing the financial crisis, financial instability issues, and how to solve this crisis for good, not just to provide kind of cushions of safety, new regulations, but a structural monetary reform to make sure that the banking sector is not originating a further global financial crisis, which is going to be dramatic because the fiscal deficits have increased, and now the room for maneuver, also in light of the pandemic crisis, for the public sector is, in a sense, close to zero.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You were, in fact, one of the economic financial brains behind the Universal Basic Income Initiative here in Switzerland. What were basically your expectations at that moment before you launched the initiative, and throughout the initiative, how did your expectation evolve after the initiative? Could you illustrate a little bit around that?
I was involved in the committee supporting the initiative, not in writing the text of the initiative itself. And at that time, I was involved because I think it is important to rethink the social welfare policies, the social welfare system in Switzerland, but also beyond it, in light of a number of issues that have transformed our economic system and our society. For instance, aging, the problem of aging in our country, but also in Europe and a number of advanced countries, the problem of digitalization, the so-called fourth financial revolution, which is going to replace a number of workers by machines, by intelligent machines, by robots, and also the fact that we live in a globalized and financialized economic system, which means that for a number of countries and industries, it is not going to be possible anymore to be focusing just on the domestic market. We need to have a global economic perspective, but also to rethink economic policies and business strategies in light of the climate change. So we have a number of interconnected issues to be addressed. And I think that in light of all these issues, we can't support anymore our social policies with just the incomes that workers do receive. We have to change entirely the fiscal basis of this social welfare system. And we need to go towards also a direction where women are going to have a better paid job, and the young people, the young generation, are going to be involved in developing their business plans without having to submit those plans to the banking industry, which is not really interested in supporting the small and medium-sized firms, especially because across the financial markets, they might get higher rents, and then over a shorter period of time, and also because young people very often have not the courage to experience new business plans because they fear to eventually go bankrupt. a universal basic income allows to rethink all these issues in a perspective that is more inclusive in economic terms, and also that increases the social cohesion at national level.
Now COVID happened. Wasn't it also in such a way, okay, but besides all the negative aspects brought, but it also towards specifically the initiative and the initiative takers, an extreme amount of knowledge, additional knowledge into this overall universal basic thinking, and where were those areas, if so?
Yes, the pandemic crisis has increased dramatically the amount of knowledge that we now have at our disposal. I think it has been pointing out or making it explicit what those issues are in the current period and in this century, and especially as regards Switzerland, we understood much better than earlier on that we need to support economic activity, not just by providing firms or businesses a kind of head and support, but also we need to support young generations and the old generation also in terms of being consumers, but also in terms of being workers, so or businessmen and women. So the idea of a basic income is to allow the young generation to be much more creative and also to have a better performance when they enter into academia. In Switzerland, it is well known that students have to work to pay for their academic taxes, to pay for their living, especially those young who don't live in the canton of their origin. They have a lot of expenditures, they don't have any financial help by the state, and so they have to work. But if they work, they have less time to concentrate on their studies. So they take much more time to study and to get a diploma than they should do. And also the results at the academic level are not so impressive for a number of them. With a universal basic income, students at university don't need to work. They have this income to support their expenditure, and also they might concentrate and have better results within the academic sphere, and also have the courage to begin a new industry or a new business, because they know that if this business is not going to work, they still have this universal basic income at the end of the day. Nobody is going to catch this income to pay for some expenditures that otherwise are going to be unpaid. And also for the women, as I said earlier on, they are not obliged to accept a job which is not paid a minimum. Nowadays in Switzerland, we have not just for women, but also for young men, we have a series of jobs as a kind of stage that they actually are exploited without any perspective of making a career. So for the young generation, women and men, universal basic income is much rewarding, and it might encourage creativity, thereby increase productivity, and thereby make sure that this digitalization is going to increase and not reduce the number of jobs eventually, because we are used to believe that an industrial revolution destroys a number of jobs, but creates more jobs than it destroys. It is so in the first, in the second, and in the third industrial revolution. Now we are experiencing a fourth industrial revolution linked to this digitalization, robotization, intelligence, artificial intelligence. But in fact, we live in a financialized economic system. So firms are going to replace workers with robots because they might pay the value added tax to buy a robot, but they don't contribute to the social welfare system. And so social welfare systems in Switzerland, the pension fund, for instance, the pension system is going to have financial troubles over the long run. And we have to replace this system with a universal basic income, which has to be properly financed. And we have to define the level of this universal basic income. Not too low, because otherwise we don't address a number of issues, but not too much, because otherwise people might remain at home and just watching TV. And we have to define also how to finance this universal basic income, not just asking workers and firms to pay a given amount on the wage level, but we have also to ask firms to pay to this fund in light of the digitalization they have in their own industry, because otherwise firms having a robot instead of a worker won't contribute to the financial basis of such a basic income.
Yeah. And actually having this debate is so interesting at this moment.
In Switzerland, we need a universal basic income even more now than we have a pandemic crisis.
And will actually increase the awareness also that we actually need it. And so, but also, would you agree that the mitigating actions you need to undertake, that also avoiding the downsides of any initiative, like we talked about inflation and so forth, it has made us more intelligent about that, because it made us realize now in practice also that, hold on, if we would just do it blindly and we don't take mitigating co-measures to avoid also downsides of it, did it also make us a little bit smarter on
I hope so, but I remember during this initiative campaign in 2016, there was a micro interview, namely we interviewed a number of people in Switzerland asking, what do you think about the universal basic income? First question, are you going to work less if you receive a universal basic income, stay at home, look at the TV all the day? The answer was no, I'm going to work even more. I'm going to be more engaged because I'm creative. I have to provide my skills and to show that I'm very able. Whereas the second question was, what do you think other people will do if they receive such an income? The answer was, they're going to remain at home, they are lazy, they don't work. So it is these quite mixed feelings. As regards myself, I'm very smart, I'm going to work even more receiving a basic income, but other people around me are going to work less, and everybody believes that this is not going to work eventually. But as I said initially, we need to consider who are empowered to receive a universal basic income, people also coming from abroad, migrants or not, adults and even children, and how much is this basic income, and particularly how are we going to finance it? And this third question is crucial, because if we believe we might pay a universal basic income to everybody, just taking on the amount of wages that are paid in Switzerland, we are going to have a flop eventually. This doesn't work. We have to impose value added, not just the workforce, but also the profits of firms, and especially those activities that are beyond the real economic system, namely financial transactions. This is why the macro tax initiative might be very helpful in supporting the universal basic income, because it might be providing tens of billions of Swiss francs per yearly in order to finance such a basic income without any negative consequences.
As we're seeing that so many societies are slowly getting out of this pandemic, and economies are starting again, and now you have on the financial market these huge debates going on, like yes, but our governments have been, our central banks have been printing money, debasing the currency, so therefore with regard to assets there will be enormous asset inflation to be expected. But at the same time, in terms of technology, has more a deflationary, should I say, effect. Where do you make the correlations, and perhaps where not, with the universal basic income? Because this makes it actually so interesting now. And actually, the coming months, what is in reality going to happen? Is this going to be temporary? Is it going to be long-term? This is the big debate that's now happening. It's almost in partly a live case in a tiny way on what we would expect. Where do you see the correlations, and perhaps correlations not to make?
Yes, this is also a very important and I would say exciting question. It's very difficult to see it clearly, but from my point of view, as you mentioned, all these expansionary or ultra expansionary central bank interventions are not actually going to be up to the task of kickstarting economic growth in an inclusive way. By contrast, they inflate asset prices, financial assets, but also real assets. In the real estate market in Switzerland, we have been noticing over the last 10 years that the real estate prices have been inflating, overheating, not because there is a higher demand linked to economic growth, but because the national bank, the Swiss National Bank, with its negative interest rate policy, has been inducing also institutional investors like pension funds to put their money and also to borrow money to put on the real estate market. So there is not really a housing speculation, but there might be a housing crisis in a few years if the situation becomes problematic for a number of people that have mortgage loan, but they are unable to pay amortization and interest at the end of the year because they have lost their job, they might have retired or whatsoever. They have divorced, for instance, or they have to move because the firm relocates activity, say in Poland and not in Switzerland. So the monetary policies have been very expansionary for asset prices to increase, but without any trickle-down effect to the real economic system. And moreover, the negative interest rates that, for instance, the Swiss National Bank practices doesn't induce firms to increase their investment if they don't expect to sell more. By contrast, there is an excess of capacity, there is an oversupply, an overproduction crisis, and in the end, firms are not going to increase investment and produce more, hiring more people if they don't see any expectations to sell this output. We have better to move to fiscal policy to increase public spending and also to rethink the welfare state, because we notice that it is impossible over the long run to finance the retirement, the pension system with the current situation and with the perspectives. So a universal basic income should be a solution, could be the best solution available, but we have to think appropriately also how to finance it, because otherwise we might disrupt the economic system, and in the end, those critics might have an argument to say, well, we did say when you launched the initiative that it was not a solution, and now we notice it doesn't work. We have to make sure that all firms contribute to this financing, the basic income, and also that particular receiving it are then engaged in supporting economic activity in any way, directly as a business person or indirectly. We know that nowadays a number of people, especially women, do contribute indirectly to the gross domestic product, to national income, because they remain at home and they address homework, or they keep healthy children or the old parents. So we have to, in a sense, pay these people even though they have no paid job. And this is a way of making them, in a sense, more integrated into our society.
And that's to fiscal policy more instead of the monetary policy. This would be introduced, if I understand correctly. To which extent, in your opinion, is if we would move to this more fiscal orientation of universal basic income, would we have the risk of having the same inflationary risk that we are actually facing now with monetary? Where's the difference then, in your opinion?
Yes, that's also a very important question. Thank you for raising it. We have to understand what is inflation. Inflation is a loss of money's purchasing power. I did my PhD at the University College London, and I published in 2001 a book entitled A New Analysis of Inflation, or something like this. And inflation is not an increase in consumer prices, as we generally believe. Generally, inflation might give rise to an increase in the price level, but not always and everywhere. And nowadays we speak about asset price inflation, which means that the real estate market or financial asset prices do increase because of firms not having interest in investing, and firms and banks in particular investing in so-called financial assets. But this is not inflation as a result of money's purchasing power being lost. It is a result of bank credit lines being granted to speculative activities. Whereas a properly defined inflation on the goods market means that there is an increase in demand for produced goods and services. And in order for this to occur, we need that consumers have a higher purchasing power. And we need that the population at work is fully employed. Because if there is an increase in demand on the goods market and there is 10% unemployment, well, then firms might hire those unemployed people to produce more, and there is no increase in goods market prices.
Yeah. So you make a clear distinction between asset inflation and CPI inflation. That really basically that has to be completely segregated from one another. Where because of you debase the currency, the asset price goes up, which is automatic, but through fiscal policy, you're trying to have a continuous, should I say, CPI controlled inflation by having companies contributing through fiscal policy. That's a little bit what.
Yes, and also to have a CPI measured inflation means that on the goods market, consumers, in particular workers, but also elderly people, have a higher purchasing power. In Switzerland, but also in a number of countries, the middle class workers or pensioners have not such a purchasing power. On the contrary case, a number of them are suffering a loss in their capacity to buy any goods or services. And therefore, if the public sector were to increase its own spending by a fiscal deficit, it depends how to finance it, but let's first begin by increasing the fiscal deficit. This will contribute to satisfy a number of consumers' needs, health or other needs, and also it would contribute in order for firms to have higher profits, because if the state spends more, directly or indirectly, firms are going to sell more output. They might also increase the employment level and perhaps also the wage level in a virtuous cycle, because everybody is going to be happier. Yeah. And eventually asset prices might inflate or increase, but because some fundamental reasons are there, not just because the central bank is expanding liquidity and then financial institutions speculate with this liquidity across the financial markets without any positive effects for the economic system as a whole, by contrast with a negative effect, which is to increase financial fragility, financial instability, which might inflate a debt, a private debt bubble, which when it bursts creates a financial crisis that is global very often and systemic, as the 2008 financial crisis. So the public spending and the public sector are crucial to make sure that we have a controlled increase in price level on the goods market, which might also provide for full employment and for financial stability, because we produce more and therefore we have enough income to support our public and private sector debts.
How do you look at the debate? Because some people say, and especially coming from the technological, I should say, entrepreneurs, you see that the whole network coming out is that it's actually said, yes, but technology has an extreme deflationary pressure. And therefore, we don't need to make sure, because whatever you buy today, tomorrow will be cheaper. And so therefore, you don't actually need that. And even in that argument, you have to take, we have the reality of our demographic challenge and our healthcare costs that are actually continuously moving. Where do you see in that area the correlations with universal basic income, and no correlation to be made in there on that particular point?
Yes, thanks for this question. Also, the challenge of economic and technical progress is that there is this deflationary pressure, innovation. We might produce more using less resources, in particular less workers. And therefore, if we have less workers, we remunerate less people, and eventually we might, as an industrial man or as a businessman, we have some troubles in selling our output because we use robots to produce, say, cars. Nowadays, cars are even drove by robots, but no robot will ever buy a car. So we have to make sure that if we produce cars, we are going to sell them. And we might tax the robot that the car industry uses in order for people to buy those cars with the help of a universal basic income. Or we might tax, in Switzerland, we have launched last year an initiative on a small micro tax. I don't know if you have heard it.
No, I didn't.
We are collecting now signatures until October 2021. If I remember correct, the deadline, because we believe that also for the value-added tax system is not workable over the long run. We cannot increase the tax on consumption, this value-added tax, because we reduce the consumer's purchasing power thereby, and we reduce the business possibility to have a profit eventually. So we have to replace the value-added tax with a micro tax on all payment traffic that is purely scriptural. We now have cryptocurrencies, but also if we pay with a bank transfer, we have to pay such a micro tax, a very small amount.
I see.
That is going to impact much more on financial transactions than on commercial transactions. In 3 full days in Switzerland, on financial markets, we have the same amount of transactions as a full year of GDP, of the gross domestic product. So we see that we have some 100 billions Swiss francs that are transacted across the financial markets, and most of those transactions don't pay any tax. And we should enlarge the tax basis to make sure that also financial institutions and financial transactions do contribute to financing public policies, including the welfare state, including the pension system, and perhaps also including some distribution to the young people that need to receive such a help, such a financial help from the state in order to start an enterprise.
Yeah, I see. Okay, so basically, if I would really resume it, is that because of the fourth industrial revolution, the productivity levels have increased to such an extent that it would more kill the purchasing power of the people for them to consume, that we have to increase the universal. If it would actually, it's because of the huge deflationary pressure, actually because of the productivity increase, we are actually taking away the purchasing power of the individual customers. And that's basically why we need to now adapt this. And that's why the universal basic income now has to solve that equilibrium, if I may say so.
Yes, you have put it very clearly. As John Maynard Keynes said, in 2020, according to his own forecast, in 2020, we just would need 15 hours a week to work to get what we as a population need at the end of the day or at the year to satisfy all our consumer needs. So if we still work 40, 42, 45 hours a week, it means that a number of people are going to be unemployed or out of employment. Owing also to this digitalization, to this fourth industrial revolution, we might produce much more using much less human resources, to use this expression. And so unless we accept that a number of people, an increasing number of people, are going to be out of work eventually, this is not practicable, because by working, people are integrating society, not just economic sphere. So we need to reduce the number of working hours, so work less in order to increase the workforce. And also for those not being able or willing to work at full time, we need some financial support. Also as consumers, because there was a Marxian economist, Michał Kalecki, a Polish economist that moved to the UK during the Second World War, who said, workers do spend on the goods market what they earn on the labor market. And firms do the opposite. Firms do earn on the goods market what they spend on the labor market. So from a macroeconomic perspective, firms are not going to earn an income on the goods market unless they pay out wages on the labor market. Of course, for a single firm, it is always convenient to reduce production costs by reducing the wage it pays to its collaborators. But if all firms were to do this, and in Switzerland, a number of firms are going in this direction, then the purchasing power of consumer is going to suffer. And eventually firms are also going to suffer, because they are going to sell less output to households. And if the firm is not able to sell all its output, it's going to restructure its business, which means delocalizing outside Switzerland or reducing the labor force. In both cases, the Swiss economy, the Swiss society loses, either on economic or social grounds. And this is also why we should make sure that a universal basic income supports economic activity, is inducing young people and also less young people to be more creative, to try new strategies, because they know if the strategy is not going to work, they still have some income, some universal basic income that allows them to have a living standard which is acceptable eventually.
But still at the same time, leave enough for motivational element or behavioral economy, that people actually are going to continue to be creative, productive, take risks and so forth, to make sure that growth or that yeah, people actually are continuously to contribute.
Yes, that's correct. Unfortunately, we are not able to predict how people are going to use this universal basic income. This is why we also need to educate, especially the young generation, to make it understand that individuals do exist, but there is also some society as a whole. And everybody has a role to play within society in order to make sure that the individual, but also society as a whole, are going to perform well and to be socially integrated and social cohesion that works in the interest of all parties involved.
Yeah.
But as I said earlier on, it would be possible to associate this introduction of a universal basic income with a tax on not just financial transactions, but electronic payments.
Okay,
and 98% in Switzerland of those transactions, in purely scriptural form, they do occur across the financial markets. So if I were to receive a universal basic income and then using it to buy or to speculate across the financial market, I would have to pay more of this micro tax than if I were to spend this basic income to buy some consumer goods, to rent a flat, or even to spend it for a holiday. I mean, if it is for a real economic activity, then the universal basic income is going to have a positive impact, perhaps also linked to the climate change. For financial transactions, these expenditures should be taxed much more. Because financial transactions very often don't contribute to the common good. By contrast, they increase financial instability. They might lead to a financial crisis eventually. So those financial transactions that are positive for the economic system, for instance, if through a financial transaction, a firm obtains the capital it needs to invest in a production process, in a new transformation technology, that's fine. But 98% of those transactions have nothing to do with the real activity of the economic system. It is pure speculation. They are buying or selling assets. They don't even know who have been issuing them, but just they speculate that the selling price is going to be higher than the buying price. And this destabilizes the financial system because if the price of a car is increasing, the demand for cars is reduced usually. Whereas if the price of a financial asset increases, the demand for it increases because people think, there might be some speculative gain to earn at the end of the day or at the end of the week. We see it with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general. They are pure speculative assets, so to speak. And we don't need a cryptocurrency. We need a higher income, not a higher number of money.
How would you apply this towards the elderly? Elderlies have worked entire life, they retire, and how would you see, perhaps as a first question, universal basic income applying to them, and then perhaps how it is now today? How would your situation without universal basic income evolving towards them? I think this is obviously a quite, I should say, big concern at this moment.
Yes, it is absolutely a very important, I would say, urgent question. The elderly people, they need to receive for their last period of life what they need and what they expect to receive, also having contributed to the pension system for decades when they were working. And from the point of view of Switzerland, it is impossible with the current pension scheme to make sure that the elderly people are going to receive what they are expecting to receive and what they deserve to receive because they have been contributing to this system for several decades. We know that over the long run, the current pension system in Switzerland is not going to work anymore. It is not resilient to digitalization, to the pandemic crisis, to financialization, and so forth. So we have to rethink this, and the elderly people should receive during this period what they need to pay also, because usually elderly people sooner or later are going to be in need of healthcare. So we know that in Switzerland, but also elsewhere, healthcare systems are very expensive. We have a kind of insurance, health insurance, but this doesn't really cover all expenditures that elderly people have to address sooner or later, a number of them at least, because they are ill or severely ill. So we need also to make sure that those expenditures are going to be financed properly, either by the public sector with an health insurance that is up to the task, or with the funds that elderly people do receive as a recompensation or as a compensation for what they've been contributing during the lifespan when they have been working. And a universal basic income would allow those to receive such funds without having to enter into a very bureaucratic process of demanding financial assistance, because this is quite a stigmatization also for people losing their jobs or for people becoming elderly. It is quite a stigma to ask the public sector to receive some social assistance. A number of them don't enter into this scheme because they don't want to be stigmatized, or they are unable even to fill in a number of forms, which are, the number of them are increasing, and very often the system doesn't pay what those people really need to pay for their debts against the health system.
If we would implement universal basic income, that means if we say we would pay higher pensions, but that would increase because those people are less productive or less active in the economic system, wouldn't that increase the burden then for the coming generations even more? And we should have actually thought about that from the beginning. I mean, he said, okay, everybody contributes for his own generation, and at least doesn't live upon inter-influence between generations. How do you see that challenge?
That's a major challenge. Thanks for raising the question. I think that we have 2 points to address at this stage. The first is that the pension scheme that is the first pillar in Switzerland, which means that the young generation or the working people pay for the elderly people, has to be reinforced because this intergenerational cohesion is good. We don't have to forget that the elderly people very often take care of the children that the young generation has, but the young have to work. The two people in a household, usually husband and wife, both have to work. And therefore, if they have some children, well, the elderly, the parents or the grandparents are welcome to take care of those children. So the elderly people don't work in a sense that they are not remunerated, but they still contribute to the well-being of the society. If the two parents are able to work at full time, it is also because the elderly, the parents or the grandparents are keeping the children. So in a sense, there is a role. And this intergenerational cohesion should be reinforced by making sure that the second pillar, the pension funds in Switzerland, they don't try to capture financial rents to pay to the elderly people what they expect to receive, but the pension funds should contribute to economic activity, should invest those savings into new businesses, into the young generation businesses. Nowadays, if a student at the end of the university receives a diploma, he is fine or she is fine, but those people are not in a position to get a loan from a bank. They might have now the crowdfunding or whatsoever, but very often the young generation is unable to start a new firm because of a lack of capital. So if the pension funds were to invest in those, say, startup, well, then there would be a higher level of economic activity, a higher level of employment, more fiscal revenue for the state, and all these could also finance more over the long run and in a more resilient way the pension schemes. The first and the second pillar should be rethought, and a micro tax on financial and electronic transactions should also help to finance the elderly people, because they need and they deserve to get what they expect to receive when they work for several decades.
How do you look in general about the monetary system today and the economic system in general, as that and the squeeze that basically we see that we have demographic actually stabilization, even deterioration, and this burden comes into this next year. How do you see, what are your expectations for the future actually?
Well, my expectations are negative. I am quite pessimistic. I see problems for the elderly, as I said. I see problems for the young generation because once they have studied and obtained their diploma, be it at university or elsewhere, they have much trouble in entering and remaining into the labor market with a wage level that is enough also to have a family and to have some children. So for both the young and the elderly people, I see it very difficult to be satisfied with what they receive from either the labor market or the pension scheme. And also because of this digitalization and also this financialization system, I see that in the climate change, we have to change radically our economic policies, because monetary policies have so far not been in a position to kickstart economic growth. They have inflated asset prices, real estate market prices, and financial asset prices. And fiscal policy is oriented towards balancing the public sector budget. Now in Switzerland, in Europe, also in the US, the public sector has been increasing its own expenditures, but in a few years' time, the public sector will have to rebalance the budget, perhaps even with austerity policies like in the euro area. Think of Greece, for instance, fiscal consolidation measures. So we need to make sure that monetary policy and fiscal policy do address in a coordinated way all these issues. And this is also where pension funds should contribute, because, as I said, for the time being, pension funds do capture rents across the financial market instead of contributing to creating national income by investing in new startup firms. So we have to rethink.
That's a major shift. I just because it's obviously easier to invest in other less risky assets, which is a little bit the policy that they've been doing so far. We see from in the US that more pension funds are more in stocks. And actually, because of the Fed interventions, people actually start to consider the stock as almost as secure as an obligation, because they basically, in the end, they're always, they cannot even a lot of specialists are arguing that the Fed cannot even allow the stock price to go much down, because it would put them at risk in even paying the pension at the end of the month. So that means really, that's really a disruptive change that needs to occur. What would you advise in the meantime, as long as it's not coming, is that adapt to whatever reality that the monetary parties are going, and what would be the recommendations towards elderly at this moment?
Well, I think that monetary policy, but also fiscal policy, should be reoriented to support the elderly people, but without neglecting the young generation. For the elderly people, it means rewarding them for what they are still contributing. As I said earlier on, if they take care of the children, well, we have to recognize that this is an important contribution indirectly to the social welfare of our economic system, to make sure that if the young generation works, it is also because the elderly are taking care of the children. And so we have to pay them correctly with a kind of check or whatsoever every month.
Very interesting.
And for the young, well, firms should also try to understand that it is in their own interest to increase the labor force, especially for the young living within the country, because those people that work eventually will also be consumers. Yeah. So for both firms and the public sector, this might increase their earnings, fiscal revenues for the public sector, and retail income for firms. And if the young are integrated in the labor market, there is also a less riot. There is much more cohesion, and so social riots is going to, if not disappear, to be reduced. Nowadays, we see that a number of people do go to the street and to manifest their anger, their anxiety. Also, we have noticed the Capitol Hill issue in January this year. Every country, the Gilets jaunes in France, there also are some problems. So we have to understand that it is in the interest of all stakeholders to go in the same direction, also as regards the climate change. This is also a major issue. But for the elderly and the young people, the public sector should make sure that both fiscal policies and monetary policies are coordinated in the interest of these two kinds of agents, because those agents are crucial for the well-being of the entire population, and also for politicians to remain in office in the end.
Yeah, indeed. Those are very interesting insights, basically, and what you just mentioned, also developing paths where elderly can still play a role in the overall society and contribute to society. And perhaps our policies until now has been, okay, you retire, why don't you go and retire, and we just, that's it, thank you very much for your services. But they should perhaps think, I don't know, you can still contribute to our society and to no, those are very, very interesting
yes, and
insights.
a number of people retiring, at least in the first 5-6 years after they retired, they would still much contribute to the firm or to the business sector in which they were involved.
Mm-hmm. I have young kids, so I pretty much adhere to what you're saying.
So they might also transfer to the young generation of workers the so-called experience or skills they have accumulated. If there is a young student and close to someone close to retirement or just retired, the elderly people might transfer their knowledge to these young students and be rewarded, not just in financial terms, but also in a kind of emotional terms, because they see that the young is going to learn a lot and is just, in a sense, in the common good, in the common interest.
Correct.
That both generations do work together.
Yeah, and even I think within the elder generation, because a lot of things are in perfect condition towards others or less, and even contributing to one another actually could also be a very an interesting. No, this is
yes. For instance, the young might explain to the old people how to use these new techniques of information systems, the new technologies linked to digitalization, and the elderly people might explain to the young, well, what is about the job itself.
Yeah. No, those are very, very interesting. Perhaps a last question before we end up is that how did COVID impact the plans or expectations you had towards the further initiative you will and the organization will take towards universal basic income? To which extent has it impacted those?
I see that it is going to have a major impact as regards the further smart working, digitalization. I've been teaching from home this year because of the impossibility to be in a lecture room, and a number of workers also in the banking industry, for instance. So people are going to work from home, and therefore, well, social contacts are going to be reduced, but this means that there will be also a reduction in the labor force. Again, a universal basic income might be even more necessary now that the pandemic crisis has increased the smart working, the working at distance, reducing also in Switzerland the number of people working, because a number of firms might also locate jobs elsewhere. And for instance, in the banking sector, a number of people have been replaced or are going to be replaced by those workers in Poland or Hungary or whatsoever, where the cost of living is lower and therefore the wage level is lower. If so, then we will notice a huge increase in involuntary unemployment in Switzerland. Involuntary unemployment means that people are unemployed even though they are willing and able to work. It's simply because firms have dismissed them, have reduced the number of working places. So it's not because one is lazy or unable to work. It is the contrary. One is very motivated to work, accepting even a wage level which is not going to pay for a living cost, but still there is no work because firms have reduced the labor force either by localizing jobs elsewhere or because they have to be restructured since there is a lack of demand on the goods market, owing to the lockdown, owing to the problems that the crisis has generated across the economic system. Firms have been having much trouble in selling their output. Some firms have been experiencing a boom, like the pharma industry, but some of the firms have been experiencing a crash, a strong recession. And so after the pandemic crisis, those firms are not going to all to recover. A number of them will go bankrupt or will be bought by other firms, but in the end, there will be a reduction in the number of working places.
Yeah. And what is the time frame now? What with regard to the initiative? Is there any concrete initiatives planned moving forward?
As regards the Universal Basic Income Initiative,
indeed.
I know that there is another small committee that is going to launch in June 2021, so next month, is going to launch a new version of this initiative, hopefully taking into account the lessons from the past, namely from the negative vote of the Swiss people. I don't know the text of this new initiative, but hopefully they will define the amount of the universal basic income, who are going to receive it, and especially how to finance such an amount. Those three questions are crucial, because otherwise those people against it on ideological grounds are going to make it easy to reject it by the people again, because the arguments are still there.
Yeah, no, this is very interesting, Professor Rossi. I'm really so happy to have you on the channel to share these insights with you. And there's so many adjacent topics that I would love to address perhaps in the future with you. But thank you so much for sharing these insights with us. And I certainly would be interested in contact in the future to dive into one of these sub-subjects that we mentioned today.
Great, I would be happy to contribute.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.